Joachim bounded through the passageway towards his family's apartment. He was getting home late and was pretty sure he was in for it when he got home, unless he got there before his parents. His father worked in an ore processing plant on the station, while his mother was a nurse in the clinic. He sped along in bounds, the gravity on the station being about 80% that of Earth. He didn't think about this much. He'd grown up on stations like this and had never even been to Earth. His family moved around to the various stations in the system, wherever there was work for his dad. His mom was a great medic, and would always be offered work at any station they settled on. They'd been on this station the longest, 3 years now. He'd heard his parents talking, and they'd decided that with the birth of his little brother, they needed more stability. He wouldn't miss packing up all his stuff and moving every few months, especially as the rates to load cargo meant he often had to decide which possessions he kept, and which he had to discard at each move. Mass cost money to move, and money was hard to get. He was 13 Earth Standard years old, a bit taller than average, thin but muscular. His family wasn't affluent enough to become overweight, and with his energy and curiosity, there were endless opportunities on the station for boys that could climb through the superstructure. He was always on the go through the station with his friends. He came to the door of their apartment and looked into the access camera. "It's me, Joe, let me in." A soft female voice said, "Ident not recognized, restate for access." "Aw, man," his mother had started trying to get him to use his given name, Joachim, and not the shorter nickname that everyone else would use, regardless of how he introduced himself. "It's me, Joachim Albert Martin. Let me in," he said with exasperation. "Access recognized, hello, Joe," the voice said. "Really?" he asked, but he accepted this irony. He walked into the apartment, the door sealing behind him. He was relieved to see he was the first one home. He helped himself to a slice of cake and some cold milk, and took these back into his room. Kicking off his sneakers, he launched himself onto his bed and enjoyed the cake with a single-minded purpose only a hungry teenager can understand. After he had downed about half the milk, he took a moment to look around. Various clothes lay strewn about the room, a couple models of ships on his shelf. He looked at these, as always, for a few moments, letting himself dream of being a Starship captain. On his desk was his pad, used for school and watching whatever was on the entertainment nets these days. Above that was a very old radio set. This was a gift from his grandfather. It had cost him some other toys and things to keep it between moves, but it was one of the only things he had to remember the old man by. It still worked, after a fashion. His father had had to fix it a couple times, using whatever components they could scrounge that would do. There's no room in space for antiques, usually. He used it for radio astronomy, mostly. He enjoyed listening to the voices of the outer planets, Jupiter's buzzing bellow, Saturn's hissing crackle. Occasionally, he could pick up the rhythmic patterns of a pulsar or something similar. He would listen to these and often wonder if they were actually alien signals, despite what all the scientists said. He set the half-empty cup down on the nightstand and hopped over to his desk. He flipped the old radio on. The waterfall display lit up, showing him where there were signals, the strongest lines were the navigation and communications channels. Both were encrypted, and he could never hear anything besides a hissing buzz when he listened to it. He could see that there was a faint signal from the Mars colony showing he could listen into some of their traffic later. Up in one corner of the display, a small indicator was flashing yellow. The legend below it was just a few letters, HCMSGRECD. He'd never seen that before. As he was pondering this, he heard the apartment door cycle open. He went into the common room and saw his mother coming in, carrying his little brother and an armful of food supplies. He went over to help her, taking the food and bringing it into the kitchen. "Oh, thank you, Joachim," she said. "How was school today?" "It was fine," he replied. In fact, he would have answered this way regardless. school was boring, but explaining all the reasons why school was boring only made his parents upset. "When did you get home?" she asked. "Oh, I've been home a while now." Which was not a lie. It had been a while, though a very short one. "Your father's coming home early today. Something big is going on, and he's getting some extra time. I thought we could have a family dinner. I picked up some chicken, vegetables, and mushrooms," she said. This was good. The chicken would be real chicken, and the vegetables and mushrooms would have been grown on the family plot in the arboretum. Humans had tried to exist in space using highly processed foods and meat grown in labs. But they found out that food had a great impact on psychology. People who got upset over eating multicolored protein cubes often did things that weren't healthy for them in space, like taking walks out airlocks or having psychotic breaks. It also turned out that meat grown in labs was invariably subject to infections, which ended up hitting the population too. Either they got sick or went hungry when a crop of lab meat failed. Finally, someone figured out that keeping chickens provided proteins in different forms. The birds ate things humans couldn't to make that protein, reducing waste, and provided rich fertilizer for the plants that produced oxygen and food for them. Transporting fertilized eggs with an inhibitor made shipping them easy. Then there was also the unintended effect of being able to interact with small animals, helping people relax and stay mentally healthy, which was a big benefit in a tight space station. He helped his mother put things in order, then retreated to his room. He examined the old radio again, dialing the Mars signal. He could hear the voices discussing docking procedures and other ship-to-ship stuff in orbit around the station over the planet. He was looking at the yellow indicator, wondering what that meant. If they had to fix the thing again, he was pretty sure his dad would probably scrap it. Parts were hard to find and expensive. Still, it seemed to be working, though. He put his fingertip on the yellow square. The main screen immediately went blank. "Oh, no, no, no!" he cried. Then a line of text rolled across the screen. Oh, not broken, maybe. But the text didn't make any sense to him. Was it an error message? A line of letters and numbers. He touched the yellow indicator again. The screen went dark, to be replaced by the usual waterfall display. "Whew," he signed, relieved that the old set hadn't finally failed for good. He tapped the square again, and the events repeated. Blank screen, the text message rolling across. This time, knowing it wasn't a fatal error, he waited to see what else would happen. Each time the text scrolled across the screen, some more letters and numbers were added. Finally, a small dialog box appeared. Message acquired, store to memory. He touched the YES option. Message stored. The screen returned to the scrolling text. He switched back to the waterfall display and used the search function to locate the frequency of this message. It was way out of the usual bands and very weak. If it wasn't for the fact that he ran the radio in a wide-open broadband mode, he'd never have seen it, and explained why it took so long for the computer to assemble it. He looked at the direction readout, wondering where it could possibly have come from. That's odd. It indicated way above the ecliptic. That didn't make any sense. He'd have to ask his dad for some help after dinner. During dinner, his father made an announcement that made him forget about everything else. His father came in, early as promised. Dinner was ready and smelled delicious. Joe couldn't wait for them to sit and eat. Finally, they sat at the table, and Joe was focused on eating, barely paying attention to his parents' conversation. He noticed, however, when his parents stopped talking, and he noticed his dad looking at him expectantly. What?" he asked, unsure what he'd missed. "There's a ship coming in," his father said. "I might be able to get you on board to see it." Joe was a little confused. Ships came and went all the time. He wasn't really excited about a tour of an ore hauler or ferry. Maybe it was one of the big cruisers, but that was unlikely. The high-tech warships rarely docked outside of naval stations. "Ah, sounds like fun, Dad. But, I got school and stuff. I don't know, Joe prevaricated. Oh, too bad. His father had an odd smile. Joe went back to eating and wondering about his parents' state of mind. Maybe one of your friends would like to come with me then. It's hard to get aboard a ship like Sundancer. I don't want to waste the opportunity. His dad paused for effect. The statement caught Joe with a mouth full of food. He nearly choked. The Sundancer was one of the starships. He forced the food down and coughed. Tears came to his eyes. Dad, he managed. Dad, I'll go. His father chuckled, while his mom scolded, Rafi, you've nearly killed the boy with your kidding. Joe could see that she was concerned, but also a bit amused. He could care less. The Sundancer, one of the first starships ever built. Her glistening golden yellow hull had been to several colony worlds and explored places only imagined. He would have given anything for a chance just to see it, let alone get inside. After he got himself under control, he asked his father, Dad, how can you get on board a starship? His father's image had just been elevated to near magician in Joe's eyes. Well, started his father, it seems the captain of the Sundancer is the great-great-great-grandfather or something like that, of the manager of the ore processing plant. Since the Stephen and I are pretty good friends, he knew you'd probably be a little excited to see her. How come his great-great-great-grandpa is the ship's captain? Asked Benny, Joe's little brother. Isn't he too old? In Benny's mind, his father was old. Anyone older than Dad was really, really old. He's not really that old. Time has just passed him by, his father replied. How did that happen, Dad? Joe asked. He'd heard stories of starship captains being almost immortals beings, but he had figured it was all hero hype, though he secretly hoped they were. It's a little complicated, his father started, but it goes something like this. In the universe, there is a maximum speed limit. Joe nodded. Light speed, I know, Dad. Right, his father said. Our starships can get right up close to it, like 99.999% of it. But they can't go any faster. That's a universal constant, I suppose. He paused for a minute, wondering how to continue. The real problem is, the closer you get to the speed of light, the slower time passes for you. In order to get to Alpha Centauri, it would seem like it would take a little over 4 years for us, but it would only be about 22 days to the people on the ship. Actually a little longer because they have to spend some time accelerating and decelerating at each end, but still, for them, the 4-year trip seems like it took a month. Benny's eyes were narrow. He wasn't sure if this was a story or fact. It didn't fit any of his world view, so he struggled with it. Joe thought about it for a second. He asked, Dad, how long would it take to get to one of the colony worlds? Let's see now. His dad thought a moment. TRAPPIST-1 is 41 light years away, so to us the trip would take 41 years and a bit, while to the crew it would be a little over 2 months' time. The furthest colony planet is an unnamed planet known as GJ 3293D. It's 66 light years out. The last starship going that way left about 32 years ago, right about when I was born. To the colonists on the ship, only about 3 months will have passed when they get there. But I'll be an old man and you guys will be adults with lives of your own. By the time the ship returns, you'll be old men, and your children will be watching it come into dock, maybe. That's one of the reasons starship captains get treated so well, I suppose. What do you mean? Joe asked. He knew that starship captains were usually incredibly wealthy, and that they seemed to have a special status that even national leaders didn't. His father looked seriously at Joe. It's like this, son. He started off. To be a starship captain means to give up everything and everyone in your life. Even in a short trip, if you left children behind, they'd be grown from babies to Benny's age when you got back. On longer trips, they'd be grandparents before you came back. Your adult family members wouldn't live long enough to see you again, so you'd lose everyone you cared about. But it's important for the entire human race that we have colony worlds, that we expand. So important that they select a special few, very few people to run the starships. They used to have full crews, but that was too much. So they automated the ships. Now it's just the captains alone, with the ship's AI. Of course they're paid well. Even at my salary, 20 years of back pay adds up. Joe thought about what his father had said. He'd often thought that being a starship captain would be the ultimate job. Now he was having second thoughts. He remembered the videos he'd seen of a returning ship, the captain's old-fashioned clothes, his snobby mannerisms. Joe realized that the clothes were the ones the captain had when he left. And his reluctance to talk to people came from the understanding that any friends he made that day, he would never see again. And part 2.